Hear the thunder of hooves across the endless steppe. This was the domain of the Scythians, the legendary horse lords whose power once stretched from the Black Sea to the borders of China. They were more than just warriors, they were masters of arcane rituals that have baffled scholars for centuries. By the end of this journey, you will know the secrets of 25 of their most powerful and mysterious ceremonies. We will uncover a world where shamans entered trances using golden bowls, where warriors swore oaths on gilded skulls, and where the bond between a rider and his horse was a sacred pact for the afterlife. What ancient practices can reveal about our own search for meaning might surprise you. What do you believe is the most powerful bond between a person and an animal? The first of their sacred rites bound a warrior to the divine itself. This was the blood oath to the Sky Father, a ceremony that forged a young man's ultimate loyalty. Before he could lead or even ride into major battle, a Scythian would stand beneath the open sky, a ritual blade in his hand. With a precise cut, he would draw a small amount of his own blood, letting it drip into a ceremonial cup. This blood was then mixed with arag, the potent fermented milk from his clan's mares. The blending of his own life force with the sacred drink of the steppe created a potent offering. He would raise this cup to the heavens, pledging his service, his victories, and his very life to the Sky Father, the ultimate ruler of their world. This was not a casual promise. It was an unbreakable vow, the very bedrock of their society. A warrior's loyalty to his chieftain, his discipline in the heat of battle, and his place in the cosmic order all flowed from this single, solemn oath. We have found echoes of this powerful ritual etched onto golden plaques recovered from ancient burial mounds. These artifacts show a figure, often on horseback, holding a cup aloft toward a stylized sun or sky symbol. While time has worn away the finer details, the central act of offering to the heavens is unmistakable. It was this sacred contract, sealed in blood and arag, that transformed a boy into a true servant of the divine, a warrior whose courage was divinely mandated. That sacred oath to the heavens was just the beginning of a warrior's journey, for his soul was now bound to another, a companion chosen not for a single battle but for all eternity. This was the consecration of the war stallion. The selection of this horse was a matter of profound importance, a process guided by omens and the wisdom of elders. A suitable horse was not merely strong or fast, it possessed a certain fire in its eyes, a spirit that mirrored the warrior's own. Once chosen, the animal was led to a sacred space on the open steppe. There, shamans would burn bundles of sacred herbs, sage to purify and wormwood to ward off evil spirits. The great stallion would be led through this thick, aromatic smoke, a ritual bath believed to cleanse its spirit and prepare it for the divine connection to come. Then came the intricate braiding of its mane. This was not simple grooming. Into the coarse hair, the warriors and shamans would weave fine golden threads and small, carefully crafted amulets. Some amulets were shaped like suns or stags, symbols of power and the celestial realm. Others held protective symbols meant to deflect enemy arrows and malevolent magic on the battlefield. Each braid was a prayer, a physical manifestation of the protection bestowed upon the animal. This ceremony forged a spiritual bond that transcended the physical world. The consecrated horse was no longer a simple beast of burden. It was a partner, a vessel of the warrior's own honor and fate. They believed that in death, this very horse would carry its rider's spirit across the Great Divide, galloping into the afterlife together. Archaeological finds from frozen Scythian tombs give us haunting proof of this profound belief. We have discovered the remains of magnificent stallions, their manes still intricately braided with faded golden threads and amulets, buried alongside their warriors, poised for that final, eternal ride. But that consecrated stallion was more than a battlefield companion. Its very milk was believed to hold the key to unlocking the future itself. Deep within the felt-lined tents, a different kind of ritual unfolded. one that required absolute stillness and a gaze turned inward. This was the rite of the Golden Bowl divination. A tribal shaman, having purified themselves through days of fasting and chanting, would take a perfectly polished bowl of solid gold. Into this sacred vessel they would pour either pure water or a special, potent brew of black mare's milk. The dark, reflective liquid in the gleaming golden bowl became a portal. For hours the seer would stare into its depths, there chanting a low, rhythmic drone meant to quiet the mind and open the inner eye. They were not merely looking at the liquid, they were looking through it, seeking to pierce the veil of time. The visions they sought were vital to the survival of the entire tribe. They might seek glimpses of an approaching enemy's strength, the outcome of a planned raid, or the best migration route to find fresh grazing lands for their vast herds. A shimmering distortion in the milk could mean a harsh winter was coming. A sudden, clear image of a soaring eagle might signal a great victory. The discovery of these very bowls in the deepest chambers of Scythian burial mounds, known as kurgans, confirms this was no mere legend. These are not simple cups, but masterpieces of metallurgy crafted with a single, profound purpose: to hold a vision of tomorrow today. The visions in the golden bowl could foretell a chieftain's fate, but when death finally arrived, the entire tribe mobilized for a ceremony of staggering scale. A fallen king did not simply disappear into the earth. His journey to the afterlife was a grand, solemn, and often brutal procession across the vast steppe. The body of the chieftain would be prepared with meticulous care, dressed in his finest robes and adorned with his most powerful gold jewelry, a king in death as he was in life. Then the procession began. For days, his people would travel with the body, moving in a slow, mournful line to a site chosen as his eternal resting place. This was not a random location, but a place of power, often a high plateau visible for miles in every direction. There, the back-breaking work of building the kurgan would commence. This was no simple grave. It was an artificial mountain, a testament to the chieftain's power, constructed layer by layer from earth, stone, and sod. The entire tribe would labor, creating a mound that would dominate the landscape for centuries to come. Deep within this growing hill, they constructed a timber-lined chamber, a subterranean hall fit for a lord of the steppes. This chamber was not a lonely tomb, it was stocked for an eternal existence. They placed his weapons, his gold vessels, and cauldrons of food and drink beside him. And then came the most harrowing part of the ritual, a practice that the Greek historian Herodotus recorded with a mix of horror and fascination. To serve the chieftain in the next world as they did in this one, select members of his household were ritually strangled. This included his wives, his personal servants, his cupbearer, his cook, and his stable master. Even his consecrated war horses were killed, their bodies arranged with solemn ceremony. The belief was clear: the chieftain would need his entire retinue for the life to come. After this profound act, the timber chamber was sealed, and the great mound was completed, hiding the king and his court from the world of the living. But for those who built the tomb and performed these rites, the ordeal was not over. They were now considered ritually unclean, tainted by the powerful forces of death. Herodotus tells us they engaged in a strict purification. They would wash their entire bodies with water, and they would cleanse the space by inhaling the smoke of hemp seeds thrown onto hot stones. This was essential, a way to wash away the spiritual pollution of death and return the living to the world of the living, ensuring the balance of the tribe was restored after such a monumental loss. Even the profound grief of a royal funeral required a final, purifying release. After the great burial mounds were sealed and the chieftain was sent to the afterlife, the living had to be cleansed of the touch of death. The Scythians turned to a powerful and aromatic rite, the purification by hemp smoke. Herodotus described a scene that seemed bizarre to his Greek readers, but it was a cornerstone of Scythian spiritual life. They would construct a small, sealed tent, a private world within the vastness of the steppe. Inside, they placed a pile of red-hot stones, their heat radiating through the enclosed space. Then the ritual began. A participant would carefully throw handfuls of hemp seeds directly onto the glowing stones. The result was instantaneous and overwhelming. The seeds would crackle and pop, releasing a thick, fragrant steam and smoke that quickly filled the tiny tent. This was no gentle incense. The air became a dense, intoxicating fog, a herbal bath for the spirit. Those inside would breathe it in deeply, their lungs filling with the purifying vapor. Soon they would be overcome by the effects, laughing and shouting with a loud, joyful ecstasy. They described this state as a divine cleansing, a way to literally sweat and shout the spiritual pollution of death out of their bodies and souls. This ritual was not limited to funerals. It was performed before major battles, important tribal councils, or any event that required a person to be in a state of spiritual purity. The ecstatic joy was a feature, not a bug. It was the sound of the soul being scrubbed clean and reconnected to the vibrant forces of life. Modern archaeology has confirmed the ancient accounts. Scientists analyzing residues found in small, portable bronze pots from Scythian graves have identified traces of burnt hemp and opium, the very tools for these sacred, mind-altering ceremonies. For the Scythians, purification was not a quiet prayer. It was a sensory explosion, a joyous roar that shook off the shadows and restored the living to the world of light. That purifying smoke washed away the shadow of death, but the Scythians also carried permanent protection etched directly onto their skin. Their bodies were living canvases for a sacred art, the tattooing of the spirit guardian. This was far more than simple decoration. It was a profound magical rite. The process was arduous and painful, a test of endurance in itself. Using fine needles carved from animal bone and ink made from crushed charcoal and other natural pigments, a skilled artist would puncture the skin thousands of times. They did not create random patterns. They wove intricate, swirling designs of powerful animals, stags with vast, curling antlers, mythical griffins with sharp beaks, and sinuous big cats poised to spring. Each creature was chosen with intention, a spirit ally for the wearer. A stag might offer speed and a connection to the celestial realms, while a panther promised stealth and lethal power. They believed that by permanently embedding this image into their flesh, they were channeling the very essence of that animal spirit. The tattoo was a conduit, a source of supernatural strength and guidance that walked with them every single day. We know this with stunning certainty because of a remarkable archaeological discovery. In the frozen high altitudes of the Altai Mountains, the permafrost preserved Scythian mummies with their skin intact. A woman known as the Ice Maiden, was found with breathtakingly detailed tattoos covering her arms and shoulders. The blue-black figures of fantastical creatures remain perfectly clear, a frozen testament to a belief that personal power was something you wore for life, a permanent guardian spirit born from ritual pain and artistic devotion. While the warriors' tattoos called upon fierce animal spirits, the Scythians knew that survival on the steppe demanded more than just battle prowess. It required the land itself to provide. Their spiritual world held a vital balance between the celestial power of the Sky Father and the nurturing force of the Earth Mother. In the soft thaw of spring, when the first green shoots pushed through the soil, the tribe would gather for a ceremony of profound gratitude and hope, the offering to the Earth Mother. This was a rite of fertility, focused entirely on ensuring the well-being of their herds and the abundance of the grasses they depended on. The entire community participated, led by the women of the tribe who held a special connection to this life-giving deity. They would prepare sacred offerings, not of blood but of life-sustaining substances, bowls of fresh mare's milk symbolizing the health of their horses, and jars of thick, golden honey, representing the sweetness and richness they prayed for, were carefully carried to a chosen open field. Then they would dig small, respectful holes directly into the earth. Into these humble altars, they would pour the milk and honey, returning the land's own bounty back to it as a gift. Alongside these liquid offerings, they would bury small, intricately crafted golden figurines. These were not depictions of warriors, but of pregnant animals, lush plants, and symbols of the sun, each one a physical prayer for growth and multiplication. This seasonal ritual reveals a crucial, often overlooked dimension of Scythian life. Beyond the fearsome horse lords was a society that understood its deep dependence on the cycles of nature. The Earth Mother was not a deity to be conquered, but one to be honored and nourished. This practice created a sacred equilibrium, a spiritual ecology where the fierce demands of the sky were perfectly balanced by the nurturing embrace of the earth. How many other secrets of their survival were woven into this delicate balance between the warrior and the world that sustained him? Yet this sacred bond with the earth did not mean their society shunned conflict. Order among the fierce horse lords was maintained through a raw and direct ceremony, the ritual combat for leadership. When a dispute over territory arose between chieftains or when a war leader died without a clear successor, the matter was not settled by lengthy debate. Instead, the contenders would meet in a formal duel, a spectacle that was as much a sacred trial as a physical fight. The combat was highly structured, fought within a marked circle witnessed by the entire tribe. The weapons were not chosen at random, they were specific and symbolic, often the sagaris, a viciously curved war axe, or the akinax, a short, double-edged dagger. This was not a brawl, it was a ceremony where every swing and parry was a prayer for divine intervention. The Scythians held a core belief that the gods themselves would guide the hand of the rightful claimant. Victory was not just a display of personal strength, it was a clear and unambiguous judgment from the Sky Father. The man left standing was by definition the one chosen to lead. This right was the ultimate expression of their meritocratic ideals. Bloodline and ancestry mattered, but in the end they were secondary to proven skill and courage. A man's right to command was earned and validated in front of his people, under the open sky, with the gods as his witness. This practice ensured that the tribe was always led by its strongest, most capable warrior, a vital necessity for survival in the merciless world of the steppe. Leadership was proven in ritual combat, but victory on the open battlefield demanded its own sacred trophy. The ninth rite, the scalping of the foe, confronts a practice that seems purely gruesome to modern eyes. Yet for the Scythians, this was a deeply spiritual act with a precise ceremonial purpose. When a warrior defeated a worthy enemy in battle, he would not simply leave the body. Using his sharp akinax dagger, he would make a circular incision around the crown of the head. Then, grabbing the hair, he would pull, cleanly separating the scalp from the skull. This was not the end of the ritual, only the beginning. The warrior would then carefully scrape the underside of the scalp, removing all flesh, and slowly cure it in the sun and wind until it became a dry, leathery hide. Sometimes he would even rub it with oils to soften it, making it pliable. These preserved scalps were not hidden away. A victorious warrior would hang them from his horse's bridle as a grisly fringe, or he would stitch many of them together into a macabre cloak, a wearable record of his prowess. But why? This was far more than a simple count of kills. They believed a person's soul, their vital energy and power, resided in the hair. By taking the scalp, the warrior was literally capturing the spirit of his enemy. He was absorbing their strength and, more importantly, preventing that enemy's soul from moving on to the afterlife. A scalpless corpse was a doomed spirit, forever trapped and unable to seek peace or revenge. The Greek historian Herodotus recorded this very custom, describing how Scythian warriors would use the scalps as napkins and boast of the number they had taken. Archaeological evidence provides chilling confirmation. Skeletal remains from Scythian-era battlefields have been found with distinct cut marks encircling the craniums, the bone itself telling a silent story of this final spiritual conquest. The scalp was more than a trophy, it was a soul captured and an enemy eternally vanquished. The capture of an enemy's soul was a brutal necessity of war, but the grief for one's own fallen was a sacred communal storm. Once a year, the entire Scythian community would gather for the weeping ceremony for the dead. This was not a quiet, private affair of bowed heads and silent tears. The air would instead be filled with a powerful, collective sound, a rising wave of loud, unrestrained wailing and poetic lamentations. Each family would stand before the burial mounds of their ancestors and release a year's worth of sorrow in a single cathartic torrent. This was a highly structured event, a scheduled and essential pressure valve for the entire tribe. The mourners would cry out the names of the departed, recount their great deeds, and express the aching void their absence had left behind. This shared, noisy expression of loss served a profound dual purpose. On a human level, it allowed every member, from the fiercest warrior to the youngest child, a sanctioned space for the collective release of grief. In a society constantly facing the threat of death, this prevented sorrow from festering silently in the heart. It reaffirmed the bonds between the living, uniting them in a common experience of love and memory. But there was a powerful spiritual belief at work here as well. The Scythians were convinced that the loud, emotional noise created a bridge to the spirit world. Their passionate cries and chants were thought to travel across the Great Divide, guiding the spirits of the departed and reminding them that they were not forgotten. This ceremony ensured the dead remained a vibrant, honored part of the community's consciousness. This raw, emotional display shatters the stereotype of the Scythian as a purely stoic, unfeeling warrior. It reveals a people deeply in touch with the full spectrum of human emotion, who understood that true strength lay not in suppressing grief, but in confronting it together, turning solitary sorrow into a unifying, spiritual force that echoed across the steppe. The raw, shared grief of the weeping ceremony gave way to a moment of singular purpose for a young warrior. His rite of passage culminated in the blessing of the Arcane. This was not the mere issuing of a weapon, but the spiritual birth of his most personal instrument of power. Before the eyes of the tribe, a revered elder, often the master smith who had forged the blade, would hold the short, double-edged dagger aloft. He would pass it slowly through the flames of a sacred fire, not to temper the metal, but to purify its spirit with the elemental force of the sky. Then he would anoint the gleaming steel with rich animal fat, a potent symbol of the earth's bounty and strength. This dual act of fire and fat united the celestial and the terrestrial, blessing the blade in the realm of both gods and men. The Arcane was far more than a tool for killing. It became an extension of the warrior's own honor, his soul made manifest in polished iron and gold. To break an oath sworn on this blade or to use it for a dishonorable act was to shatter a part of oneself. This profound symbolism is etched into the artifacts they left behind. The hilts and scabbards of surviving Arcane daggers are masterpieces of intricate art. We find them adorned with coiled panthers, their bodies a fluid pattern of muscle and grace, or with stags locked in eternal combat. This was not simple decoration. Each creature was a spirit guardian, its power bound to the weapon and by extension to the warrior who carried it. The dagger was a compact universe of belief, a physical prayer for protection, victory, and moral integrity that would hang at a man's hip for his entire life. This sacred dagger was a warrior's soul, but the lifeblood of the entire tribe flowed from the horse. At the peak of summer, when the sun hung longest in the sky, the Scythians performed their most vital communal rite, the horse sacrifice at the solstice. This was not an act of wanton destruction, but a profound offering to the sun itself, a plea for its continued favor to ensure their herds would thrive and multiply. The entire ceremony began with a search for a living embodiment of purity and power. The tribe's elders and shamans would walk slowly through the herds, their eyes searching for a single, perfect specimen, an unblemished white stallion. Its coat had to be as bright as the summer sun, its spirit untamed and noble. This animal was seen as a direct conduit to the celestial realm, a worthy gift for the great life giver in the sky. Once chosen, the horse was not simply led to the altar. It was adorned with garlands of sacred herbs, and its mane was braided with strips of red-dyed felt, the color of blood and life. The entire tribe would then form a solemn procession, escorting this living sacrifice to a high place, a hilltop where they stood closest to the heavens. The air would be thick with the scent of burning sage and the rhythmic beat of drums, a sound meant to carry their prayers upward. The ritual slaughter was swift and precise, performed by a shaman with a single sacred blade. They believed the act had to be clean, a respectful release of the spirit, not a prolonged struggle. As the life left the magnificent animal, its blood was caught in a large golden bowl, a vessel of immense spiritual potency. This blood was not wasted. The shamans would then dip their hands into the bowl and anoint the tribe's sacred idols, small figures carved from wood or stone that represented their gods. This act was seen as feeding the gods, renewing their power and connection to the people. But the most poignant part came next. The same sacred blood was used to gently mark the foreheads and cheeks of the tribe's children. This was a powerful blessing, a direct transfer of the horse's vitality and the son's favor to the next generation, ensuring their health and strength. Finally, the horse's body was carefully butchered. Its meat was cooked in great bronze cauldrons and distributed to every single member of the tribe in a solemn, sacred feast. By consuming this holy flesh, each person internalized the sacrifice, binding themselves to the son's covenant and the continued prosperity of their herds. Every part of this ritual, from the selection of the white stallion to the shared meal, reinforced a single, unshakable truth. The fate of the Scythians was inextricably linked to the horse, a bond of survival, spirit, and the sun itself. The blood of the sacred horse bound the tribe to the sun, but a warrior's word was sealed with an object far more terrifying. The 13th rite required a vessel of bone and gold, the oath sworn on a gilded skull. When a pact of ultimate importance was to be made, a chieftain would produce a human skull, its dome meticulously cleaned and covered in a layer of shimmering, hammered gold leaf. This was not a random trophy, but the cranium of a particularly powerful ancestor or, in some cases, a formidable enemy king defeated in battle long ago. The belief was simple and absolute. The spirit of the person who sculled this was still resided within the bone, retaining all of its former authority and power. This spirit would serve as the eternal witness to the oath. The ceremony was stark and unforgettable. The chieftains or warriors making the pact would gather around. A potent, sacred drink was prepared, a mixture of strong wine and a few drops of their own blood, mingling their life force with the ritual. This dark liquid was then poured into the hollow of the gilded skull. Each man, in turn, would lift the heavy, gleaming relic to his lips and drink deeply from it. As the metallic taste of the wine and the iron tang of blood filled his mouth, he would swear his vow aloud, calling upon the spirit inside the skull to hear him and hold him to his word. To break an oath sworn in this manner was considered the highest form of sacrilege. It was not merely a social transgression. It was an invitation for the vengeful spirit within the skull to unleash a curse upon the oath breaker, bringing sickness, ruin, and a dishonor that would follow his own spirit into the afterlife. The archaeological record offers chilling, tangible evidence for this practice. From burial mounds across the steppe, excavators have recovered human skulls, some of enemies, some of revered elders, that were carefully prepared and decorated with gold leaf or intricate designs. These are not casual war trophies. They are relics of a profound and binding spiritual contract, a promise made to the dead that was more unbreakable than any law of the living. Beyond the stark world of warriors and oaths lived a group of mystics who defied all simple categories. The Inaris were the most revered soothsayers of the Scythian world, biological men who lived fully as women and were believed to hold a direct line to the divine. Their unique status was a divine gift or perhaps a curse, said to have been bestowed by the great goddess Argymposa herself as a result of a sacrilege committed against her temple in a forgotten age. This transformation was not seen as a personal choice, but as a mark of the goddess's favor, granting them unparalleled access to the spirit world. Their ambiguous nature was their power, a living bridge between the male and female, the human and the celestial, allowing them to see what others could not. Their primary role was divination, and their methods were as unique as their identity. When a chieftain needed guidance, he would not go to a warrior, he would seek out an Inari. The mystic would take a bundle of pliable willow wands and carefully lay them out on the ground. Then, in a state of deep trance, they would begin to slowly, intricately weave the wands together, all while holding long, narrow strips of lime tree bark in their mouths. The act of weaving was a form of meditation, a way of tangling the threads of fate so that a pattern might emerge. As they worked, they would utter low, prophetic chants, their words shaped around the bark in their mouths, the sound itself believed to carry magical power. The final woven structure, a complex lattice of willow, was then read like a map. The patterns in the wood, the way the strands crossed or fell, revealed the answers to the questions posed, the will of the goddess made visible in a fragile, temporary sculpture. These seers held immense influence, often advising kings on matters of war, peace, and migration. Their high status proves that Scythian society, for all its warrior ideals, reserved a place of ultimate respect for those who transcended conventional boundaries to serve a higher, mystical truth. While the Inaris communed with the divine through complex prophecy, every Scythian family maintained a direct connection to the sacred within their own home. This was the 15th rite, the making of the felt idol. In the warm, smoky interior of a felt tent, a deeply personal ceremony would unfold, led by the matriarch of the household. They would take clean, carded wool from their sheep and begin the ancient, rhythmic process of felting, layer upon layer, compressing the fibers with hot water and steady pressure. Over days, a simple, pillar-like form would emerge from their hands, a soft, sturdy zonon that would become the family's personal guardian. This was not a grand statue with a detailed face, but an abstract shape, its very simplicity believed to make it a more potent vessel for a protective spirit. Once the form was solid, the family would adorn it with their most precious small treasures, sewing on polished river stones, beads of amber traded from the north, or even tiny flakes of gold. This act of decoration was a prayer in itself, a way of investing the family's wealth and identity into the idol. The ritual of care was continuous. Regularly, they would anoint the felt pillar with rich animal fat to keep it supple and strong, and with drops of fresh mare's milk to nourish the spirit within. This idol was the silent, watchful heart of the home. It was the focal point for daily, quiet prayers for health and safety, and for small offerings of the first morsel of a meal or a sip of arak. Here was the core of their spirituality, a humble, hands-on faith that thrived alongside the grand public sacrifices and warrior oaths, a reminder that for the Scythians, the divine was not only in the vast sky, but also in the intimate, woolen heart of the family tent. That felt idol watched over the family tent, but the spirit of the wild stag guided the entire tribe toward the great mystery of death. The 16th rite, the ceremony of the golden stag, centered on one of the most powerful and recurring figures in all of Scythian art. The stag was more than a mere animal, it was a celestial messenger, a creature whose towering antlers were seen as branches reaching for the heavens, connecting the earth to the realm of the gods. Its image appears everywhere, from tiny belt buckles to massive gold plaques meant to adorn a chieftain's funeral shroud. Scholars believe this symbolism culminated in a profound seasonal ritual. In this ceremony, a tribal shaman would don an elaborate headdress crafted from leather and wood, from which soared a magnificent pair of antlers, sheathed in hammered gold leaf that caught the firelight. The weight of this headdress was immense, both physically and spiritually. Adorned in this regalia, the shaman became the living embodiment of the stag. The ritual began with a slow, rhythmic beat of a drum, mimicking the creature's heartbeat. Then the dance would start. It was not a graceful ballet, but a powerful, stomping, leaping performance. The shaman's movements were designed to channel the raw, untamable energy of the animal, its speed, its majesty, and its otherworldly purpose. This dance was a desperate plea and a guided journey. The Scythians viewed the stag as a psychopomp, a spirit guide whose sacred duty was to lead the souls of the recently deceased safely through the treacherous landscape of the afterlife. They believed the path to the next world was fraught with dangers, shadowy spirits, and confusing crossroads. The stag, with its supernatural knowledge of both the earthly and celestial realms, could navigate this void. As the shaman danced, the tribe's chants were not for the living, but for the dead, a vocal map to help the stag spirit find and escort their loved ones to their final resting place among the stars. The countless golden stag figurines found in graves from the Black Sea to Mongolia were not just valuable art, they were spiritual passports placed with the dead to ensure a divine guide would be waiting for them in the world to come. A young man's entire future rested on a single, fluid motion at a full gallop. The initiation of the horse archer was the ultimate test, a breathtaking display of skill that separated a boy from a true warrior of the steppe. The challenge was deceptively simple, yet demanded a lifetime of practice. The aspirant would mount his horse, a bow in his hand, and a small, gleaming bronze ring hanging from a thin cord ahead of him. His task was to charge toward that target, synchronizing his body with the powerful rhythm of the animal beneath him, and loose an arrow directly through the center of the ring. This was not about hitting a large, stationary object. It was about precision, coordination, and grace under the immense pressure of an entire tribe watching his every move. The wind, the pounding of hooves, the sway of the saddle, every element conspired against him. To thread that arrow through the small circle, he had to become one with his horse, his aim an extension of their shared momentum. Success in this rite was his final passport into the warrior class, granting him the right to fight alongside the men, to share in the spoils of war, and to have his voice heard in the council. But failure was a public and profound disgrace. A missed shot meant he was not yet ready. He would be stripped of his provisional weapons and returned to the boys for another year of grueling training, his social standing frozen until he could prove his worth. This ceremony was the purest expression of the Scythian soul, where martial prowess and equestrian mastery fused into a single, defining act. It was a test that ensured only the most skilled, the most focused, and the most harmoniously bonded riders would ever earn the title of Horse Lord. That fluid grace of the archer was for the world of the living, but a quieter, more reflective duty awaited every Scythian at the foot of the great burial mounds. The 18th rite, the libation to the ancestors, was a profound act of remembrance that sustained the spirit of the entire tribe. During key festivals, particularly at the turning of the seasons, families would make a solemn pilgrimage to the kurgans where their forebears rested. They did not come empty-handed. In their grasp were vessels filled with the most precious liquids of their world. One might carry a skin of potent kumis, the fermented mare's milk that was their daily sustenance. Another might hold a jar of fine wine, a rare and valuable trade good. In the most solemn of ceremonies, they might even offer a cup containing the blood of a freshly slaughtered sheep. The act itself was simple, yet charged with immense meaning. They would kneel at the base of the great earthen mound, the artificial mountain that housed their ancestors, and slowly pour the offering directly onto the soil. They watched as the dark liquid seeped into the earth, disappearing from sight. This was not a disposal of leftovers, it was a deliberate feeding of the dead. They believed the spirits of their ancestors still resided within the kurgan, and that these libations were a form of spiritual nourishment, a way to sustain them in the afterlife. A spirit that was well-fed and honored would, in turn, look favorably upon the living. They would intercede with the greater gods, ensuring protection for the tribe, success in hunts, and the fertility of their herds. This practice wove an unbroken thread between generations. It was a contract of memory and care, a promise that those who had come before were not forgotten. By pouring a portion of their own life's bounty into the ground, the living reaffirmed that they were part of a continuous line, forever connected to the wisdom and the watchful eyes of those who had shaped their world. The honor poured out for ancestors stood in stark contrast to the fate awaiting a vanquished foe. For a king who had gravely wronged them, death in battle was not the end of his ordeal. It was the beginning of a final, terrifying rite designed to utterly annihilate his legacy. This was the ritual dismemberment of the enemy king. After a decisive victory over a hated rival, the Scythians would take the body of the fallen ruler and subject it to a systematic, ceremonial destruction. Using their sacred Arcane daggers, they would carefully sever the limbs from the torso and the head from the body, but this was not mere mutilation. Each act had a precise, magical purpose. The skin, meticulously flayed from the body, was not discarded. It was treated and stretched, then used to cover the surface of a shield or to line the inside of a quiver. Every time the Scythian chieftain raised that shield in a future battle, he was literally hiding behind the skin of his greatest enemy. Every arrow he drew from that quiver was cradled in the flesh of the man he had conquered. This was the ultimate insult, a perpetual humiliation that followed the foe even into death. Yet the ritual went deeper than mere mockery. They believed that by wearing and using the physical remains of their enemy, they could magically absorb his strength, his cunning, and his royal authority. The final act was reserved for the head. The skull itself was cleaned of all flesh, polished until it shone, and then, in a grim echo of the oath-taking ritual, it was sheathed in a layer of gleaming gold leaf. This gilded cranium was then fitted with ornate metal bands and set upon a stand, transforming it into a macabre drinking cup, a permanent trophy for the victor's table. Why create such a gruesome vessel? The Scythians were convinced that a person's spirit retained its power and could seek vengeance if left intact. By dismembering the body, flaying the skin, and turning the skull into a common cup, they were shattering the enemy king's spiritual unity. They were scattering his essence and preventing him from ever becoming a cohesive, vengeful ghost in the afterlife. He was transformed from a feared ruler into a useful object, his power siphoned away by his conquerors and his spirit forever broken. This rite was the dark, inevitable counterpart to their own sacred burials, a brutal declaration that for their greatest enemies there would be no honored journey to the next world, only consumption and eternal servitude. That brutal destruction of an enemy king was for the world of vengeance, but the preparation for battle demanded a sacred confrontation with fear itself. The 20th rite, the fire dance of the warriors, was an ecstatic spectacle of raw courage and purification. On the eve of a great conflict, the tribe would build towering bonfires, their flames clawing at the twilight sky. The warriors, stripped to their waists and adorned with their most potent tattoos, would gather before the roaring heat. The air crackled with more than just energy. It was thick with the scent of burning wood and the rhythmic, hypnotic beat of hide-covered drums. This was not a warm-up, it was a spiritual trial by fire. One by one, the men would begin to move, their feet stamping in time with the primal rhythm. Their dance started as a slow, deliberate circle, but as the chanting of the shamans and the onlookers grew louder and more insistent, the movement transformed. It became a wild, leaping frenzy. The warriors would sprint toward the blazing pyres and with a final, powerful thrust of their legs, hurl themselves directly through the licking flames. They would leap over the hottest parts of the fire, their bodies silhouetted against the inferno, landing on the other side with triumphant shouts. They believed the flames did not burn their flesh. Instead, they scorched away all traces of fear, doubt, and hesitation. It was a baptism of fire that left the warrior spiritually cleansed and imbued with the ferocity of the element itself. This visceral, shared experience created an unbreakable group cohesion. As they danced and chanted and leaped together, their individual fears melted away, fused into a single, collective resolve. A man who had danced through fire with his brothers would never break rank in the heat of battle. He carried the blessing of the blaze within him, a sacred fury that made him an unstoppable force when he charged onto the field at dawn. The fire dance's cleansing fury gave way to a ceremony of ultimate judgment, held not for the living but for a chieftain's eternal spirit. The 21st rite, the weighing of the chieftain's soul, was a profound post-mortem ritual that would decide his final fate. After the great leader was laid to rest within his timber-lined chamber, the tribe's most senior shamans would gather for one last solemn duty. They would produce a magnificent set of ceremonial scales, often crafted from bronze and inlaid with gold. In one pan of these scales, they would place a single artifact representing the chieftain's very essence, a small, intricately carved golden figure meant to be his soul. In the opposite pan, they would carefully lay a single golden feather, a symbol of truth, purity, and the cosmic order decreed by the Sky Father. The entire ceremony hinged on this delicate balance. If the golden soul figure proved to be as light as or lighter than the feather, it was a moment of immense relief and celebration. The shamans would declare the chieftain's spirit worthy, his heart unburdened by treachery or dishonor. This favorable outcome did more than just grant him passage to a blessed afterlife. It served as a divine endorsement of his entire reign. For his grieving people and his nervous successor, this verdict was absolutely crucial. It legitimized the new leader's claim to power, proving that the previous chieftain had ruled with the gods' favor and that the tribe itself remained in good standing with the cosmos. The people could then migrate, wage war, and prosper with the confidence that their entire social order was built on a foundation of divine approval. But what if the soul was heavier than the feather? A grim outcome was believed to bring a terrible curse, a sign that the chieftain had failed in his sacred duties, potentially dooming his lineage and bringing misfortune upon the tribe he left behind. The discovery of ornate handheld scales in royal Scythian tombs, often placed beside the deceased, suggests this was more than just a myth. It was a spiritual audit, a final, terrifying test to ensure that a leader's power in life was matched by the weight of his integrity in death. The judgment of the scales was a public declaration, but the most profound conversations with the divine were held in absolute silence. A shaman's true power lay in a secret lexicon of the soul, a language spoken without a single word. This was the secret language of the shamans, an esoteric system of communication reserved for the most critical moments of healing and prophecy. Its grammar was written in the subtle movements of the hands, each gesture a complete sentence to the watching spirits. A slow, upward sweep of the palm might be a call for celestial intervention, while a fist pressed against the earth was a plea to the underworld for knowledge. They drew intricate symbols in the bare soil with a finger or a staff, temporary sigils that channeled power and mapped the invisible forces at play. And underpinning it all was the constant, hypnotic rhythm of the drum, a heartbeat that could shift from a gentle pulse to a frantic gallop, each pattern a specific summons or a protective ward. Mastering this complex vocabulary was the work of a lifetime, taught only through a grueling, one-on-one initiation under a master shaman. An apprentice would spend years in isolation, learning to still their own mind until they could hear the whispers of the spirit world and respond with the precise, physical poetry demanded of them. This hidden language was deployed during the most intense healing rituals, where a misplaced word could mean death. The shaman would circle a sick tribesman, their hands weaving intricate patterns in the air to draw out the malevolent spirit causing the illness, their drumbeat holding a steady, protective rhythm to guard the patient's vulnerable soul. During major divinations, when the fate of the tribe hung in the balance, this silent tongue allowed the shaman to negotiate directly with powerful, often capricious, spiritual entities, bargaining for a glimpse of the future without the clumsy and dangerous interference of human speech. This rite reveals a stunning intellectual depth behind the Scythians' fierce exterior, proving their spirituality was not merely a matter of explosive emotion, but also of meticulous, silent, and profoundly sophisticated cosmic diplomacy. Every Scythian warrior carried a secret, a spiritual companion known only to him. This was the binding of the totem animal, a deeply personal rite that defined a man's inner character. The journey began not on the battlefield, but in the quiet solitude of the steppe or the dark isolation of a felt tent. A young man would enter a prolonged state of fasting and meditation, often aided by the rhythmic beat of a drum or the subtle smoke of sacred herbs. His goal was to open his mind to the spirit world and receive a vision. In this dreamlike state, an animal would emerge from the shadows of his consciousness. It might be a wolf embodying cunning and ferocious loyalty to the pack. It could be a soaring eagle representing far-seeing wisdom and freedom. Or perhaps it was a swift deer, a creature of grace and intuition. This was not a random apparition. The animal that chose him was a reflection of his own latent strengths and the unique role he was destined to play. Once the vision was received, the spiritual bond had to be made physical. The warrior would then craft a small, potent amulet. If his totem was a wolf, he might secure a wolf's tooth, drilling a small hole through its root. If an eagle had appeared, he would bind a single, sharp talon with sinew. For a fish, a single, iridescent scale might be sewn into a leather pouch. This token was never worn as simple jewelry. He would bind it directly to the hilt of his Achaine's dagger, lash it to his bow, or wear it on a thong against his chest. This object became a sacred battery for the animal's power. Before a charge, he might grip the wolf tooth on his sword hilt to summon a burst of pack fury. When scouting a new land, he would touch the eagle talon to gain a predator's perspective. This totem was a lifelong guide, a source of whispered courage and instinct. It was a personal contract with the wild, a promise that he was never truly alone, for a part of the untamed steppe walked with him in every step he took. A warrior's personal totem guided his steps, but the entire tribe moved by the silent rhythm of the moon. When the night sky grew dark and the moon vanished entirely, the Scythians saw not an absence but a profound opening. This was the time for the new moon sacrifice, a monthly plea to the deities of the unseen world. The dark of the moon was a blanket of potential, a celestial blank slate perfect for beginnings that required secrecy and shadow. For a people whose survival often depended on the element of surprise, whether in a swift raid on a rival clan or a silent hunt for elusive game, this phase held immense power. The ritual was one of focused intention. Instead of a grand white stallion, the offering was often a sheep or a goat, animals deeply woven into the fabric of their daily life. The sacrifice was performed with a quiet solemnity under a canopy of stars, the only light coming from the ceremonial fire. The animal's blood was carefully collected and offered to the lunar deities, a petition for their favor. This was not a request for open victory, but for safe passage through darkness, for the ability to move like a ghost across the steppe, and for success in all endeavors that thrived in the absence of light. They believed the dark moon amplified magic, making their prayers and offerings more potent. By aligning their actions with this celestial event, they sought to harness its energy, turning the terrifying void of a moonless night into their greatest ally. The meat from the sacrifice was then shared in a quiet feast, binding the tribe in a collective pact of stealth and shared purpose, ready to embark on their next venture cloaked in the blessing of the night itself. For a Scythian warrior, the greatest fear was not a violent death but a quiet one. To die in bed from sickness or the slow decay of age was a spiritual crisis. It meant his soul had been denied the sacred gateway of the battlefield, leaving him stranded, unable to join the glorious eternal hunt of his ancestors. The 25th and final rite, the final ride ceremony, was the tribe's profound answer to this dilemma, a beautiful and symbolic act to correct a cosmic wrong. When such a warrior passed, his people would prepare his body not for a summer rest but for a journey. In his timber burial chamber, they placed him in his finest robes, but they did not lay him down to sleep. They sat him upright, his back straight, his gaze facing the entrance. His trusted Achinae's dagger was placed in his hand, and his bow was laid across his lap, its string carefully cut to signify its service was over in this world but ready for the next. Beside him they positioned his most loyal companion, his consecrated war horse. The animal was not killed, as in a chieftain's burial. Instead, it was fully saddled and bridled, its tack polished and complete, a living vessel prepared for immediate departure. The final act was one of thunderous symbolism. His clansmen, all the warriors he had ridden with, would mount their own horses and form a wide circle around the base of the newly built kurgan. Then, at a shouted signal, they would kick their horses into a full, roaring gallop. They circled the mound not once but 3 times, the ground shaking beneath the drumming of countless hooves. This was not a mournful procession. It was a simulated battle charge, a deafening show of force meant to tear a hole in the veil between worlds. The sound, the dust, the raw energy, all served a single purpose: to create enough spiritual momentum to launch their comrade's spirit from its stagnant death onto the path of the afterlife. They were giving him the violent, honorable departure he had been denied, charging alongside him one last time to ensure he could spur his spectral horse forward and finally join the endless hunt beneath the stars. From the blood oath sworn to the sky itself to the final, thundering ride around a warrior's grave, these 25 rites reveal a civilization of breathtaking spiritual complexity. They were not a random collection of superstitions, but a perfectly interlocked system of belief, a sacred mirror of their nomadic existence. Every ritual, from the grand horse sacrifice to the quiet anointing of a felt idol, served a precise purpose, binding the individual to the tribe, the living to the dead, and the people to the merciless, magnificent steppe that was their home. Their world was one of constant motion and stark contrasts, and their spirituality reflected this entirely. It balanced explosive, ecstatic purification with silent, secret languages. It demanded brutal conquest of enemies while requiring tender, annual tears for ancestors. It celebrated the fierce power of the warrior while honoring the ambiguous wisdom of the seer. This was not a religion of grand temples, but one of felt tents, open skies, and the sacred bond between a rider and his horse. The sheer diversity of these practices shows us a people deeply in touch with the full spectrum of human experience, from the terror of battle to the quiet comfort of a household guardian. Their rituals were the tools they used to navigate a dangerous and unpredictable world, to find meaning in the fleeting nature of life, and to ensure their legacy would gallop on long after they were gone. So we leave you with this final question to ponder. Which of these mysterious rites do you find most fascinating, and what does its power tell us about our own enduring human need for ritual and connection? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this journey into the world of the horse lords captivated you, subscribe for more explorations into history's greatest mysteries, and be sure to ring the bell so you never miss our next adventure into the past.